Rabbi Steve Leader, and I particularly also want to welcome our listeners from WBAI in New York City and KPFK here in Los Angeles. The ancient rabbis 2,000 years ago called poverty the worst of all afflictions. It afflicts African Americans, white Americans, brown Americans, Christians, Muslims, and Jews. I received this email the day before Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year for Jews. Dear Rabbi, I'm writing to you from a humble and desperate place, one in which I never expected to find myself. After working as a successful film executive for 30 years, I'm in a situation where I need to reach out to whoever and wherever I can for financial assistance in order to be able to feed and shelter my family. Having volunteered with my boys at the Temple Sunday morning breakfast program, I lie awake nights fearing the possibility that I could one day be on the receiving end of that program. In the wake of 5 years of unemployment, during which time I've liquidated my inheritance, savings, pension, and college funds for my children, and borrowed money from family and friends, I now, in order to keep going, have desperately tried to secure a second hard money loan at an extremely high interest rate, but with no stated income for several years, I have not been able to obtain one. I was wondering if the temple has any kind of financial assistance or loan program for me. I am in desperate need. Please call. This man who volunteered right here to feed the hungry now needs to be fed. A lot of us think we know Los Angeles, where to eat, where to play, where to relax, the best shortcuts in traffic. But do you know this? Counties and prison planners estimate the number of cells necessary in the future based on how many fourth graders in a public school system cannot read. Nearly 50% of students don't graduate from LAUSD high schools. Los Angeles is the homeless capital of the nation. LA County foreclosures are up 222%. 73,000 people are homeless every night. 40% of them are women and children. 1.6 million have no health insurance. 200,000 of them are children. Unemployment in LA County is up from 5.7% in April 2008 to over 14% now. Over 200,000 households live on less than $10,000 a year. More people live in extreme poverty in LA County than the total population of Seattle, Miami, or Las Vegas. I almost did something sacrilegious this afternoon to prove a point. I was thinking about taking a Bible and a pair of scissors and using that pair of scissors to cut out every single verse in the Bible that has to do with our obligations to the poor and the powerless. If you cut out every reference to the poor and the needy in the Bible, the entire section of prophets is decimated. The Psalms ripped to shreds, and sections of Leviticus and Deuteronomy are eviscerated. If we remove from our faith the obligation to the poor, our faith is nothing more than tattered rags. So we are here to proclaim what all faiths proclaim, that there can be no peace without fairness. There can be no peace without prosperity. Yesterday, the Jewish people gathered by the millions, thousands of us in this very room, to ask forgiveness from God and each other for our sins. We fasted in order to remember the hungry, but remembering is not enough. By the millions, we read the words of the prophet Isaiah, calling to us across 1,000 generations. Is this what you call a fast? Asked the Lord. No. This is the fast I look for. To unlock the shackles of injustice, to undo the fetters of bondage, to let the oppressed go free, to break every cruel bond and chain, to share your bread with the hungry, bring the homeless into your house, satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then shall your light blaze forth like the dawn. So I welcome you to Wilshire Boulevard Temple. Now, let's all get to work. And it's now my honor to introduce my friend to you. I have known Tavis for nearly 25 years. 25 years ago, he was working for Mayor Tom Bradley, and I was the new 26-year-old associate rabbi here at Wilshire Boulevard Temple. 25 years ago, I had a full head of curly brown hair, a 29-inch waist, and I weighed 140 pounds. Today, I have less hair, and never mind the rest. But 25 years ago, Tavis looked exactly the way he looks now. I don't know how he does it. We began working together to help African Americans and Jews understand their common past and their intertwined future. We became dear and trusting friends. I am very proud to call Tavis my friend. I am proud of the ways in which he has worked so hard to be better, not just better off. I am proud of his intelligence, his balance, truth, his courage, and the humor he brings to radio and television. I am proud of his personal integrity. I am proud because he really is the same guy today that he was when we first met 25 years ago. I give to you now, my friend, and one of our nation's true treasures, Tavis Smiley.
Thank you. Let me just start by saying that I would take a bullet for Rabbi Steve Leader. Now, there's some folk I know who I take a bullet for in my left leg, in my pinky toe. But for Steve Leader, I would take a bullet right smack dab in the middle of my heart. That is how much I love Steve Leader. As we say it in my neighborhood, I love you like a fat kid loves cake. And there ain't nothing you can do about it. I just love you, and there's nothing you can do about it. When I met Steve Leader 25 years ago, I was saying to Dr. West earlier, describing to him how much I adore, and I do mean adore, the courage, the conviction, the commitment, and the character of Rabbi Leader. I was saying to Dr. West that when I first met him, in the very first conversation, here's a white Jewish brother talking to me and quoting to me The Fire Next Time, of course, from James Baldwin. When you meet a brother who's like that, the first time you meet, he is breaking into a deconstruction and, quite frankly, a dissertation. It was brilliant. Of his read on Baldwin and on The Fire Next Time. I knew then that we were going to be all right. We'd be friends for a lot of years. And I am humbled, I am honored to watch his growth, to see his trajectory. This is a very, very special temple. wonderful synagogue. For those not in LA or don't know the history of Wilshire Boulevard Temple, it's an iconic institution in this city. I was here when the prior Rabbi Harvey Fields, who I send the best wishes to today over this radio program. I was here when Rabbi Fields was here, and of course when Steve arrived, and to see that Steve has become the man and is so respected and so regarded in this city and around the country. Y'all pardon Steve and I for just having a love fest here for just a few minutes. Again, I love Steve Leader. There's some major work about to be done on this beautiful and historic edifice, and Steve held off that work to accommodate this wonderfully attended town hall meeting in LA. So before I move forward, please once again thank my dear and abiding friend, Rabbi Steve Leader, and the wonderful team here at the Wilshire Boulevard Temple for making this possible. I am honored every day of my life that I get a chance to be heard over public radio and to be seen over public television. To be sure, because I have worked in commercial television and commercial radio, I know what that side is all about. And I'm humbled to say that every so often there are invitations for me to go back to commercial television and back to commercial radio. It's nice to have options. It's nice to have people interested in you doing stuff with them commercially. But I found a home on public radio. I have found a home on public television. And these mediums allow us to challenge folk to re-examine the assumptions they hold. These mediums allow us to help folk expand their inventory of ideas. These mediums allow us to introduce Americans to each other. And this audience is a wonderful example of that. This is a multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic audience. This audience right now in LA is a microcosm of the world, some of everybody. There are 100 languages spoken in our school system in LA, and this room is evidence of all that richness that makes up this beautiful tapestry that we call the City of Angels. And so I celebrate being on public radio and public television every day, and I want to again thank WBAI in New York and KPFK here in LA for carrying this town hall meeting. Why don't you thank them for Lastly, I want to thank the audience for being here. We live in a world where the evidence would suggest there are too many people who no longer care. Too many people who are self-absorbed and self-centered. Too many folk who have become nativist in our society, and the evidence abounds to prove that point. But when you call for a town hall meeting, a conversation about poverty, and hundreds of folks show up to participate in that conversation, I am humbled by your presence here today. So I want to thank each of you for listening on radio and for being in this wonderful and iconic historic building, Wilshire Boulevard Temple, for being here today. Now, to my left sits the person who I regard as the nation's leading public intellectual. I didn't say black, I said the nation's leading public. Of our time. He has a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love. There are a lot of smart folk in the academy, but Dr. West has what I call, Cornel West has what I call a usable intellect. Not just smart, but he has a usable intellect. My friend Wynn Brown raised that phrase some years ago, that Doc has a usable intellect. Because he comes out of the ivory tower, out of the academy, and shares what he knows with humility and with love. I say all the time, he has a heart full of grace and a soul that's generated by love. He has been at Occupy New York, Occupy Wall Street on 2 separate occasions. Not a whole lot of academics running down to Wall Street to protest with these courageous Americans. Dr. West has been there twice. He's been to Occupy Boston already. And just this weekend, he and I spent time, on 2 occasions, here in LA on the grounds of City Hall and Occupy LA. We were there over the weekend. And that's where I want to start my brief remarks. In the tradition of the black church, after my friend Rabbi Leader concluded his remarks, I wanted to just stand up and say, amen, God bless y'all, let's go home. Because Rabbi Leader made the case. He laid it out so brilliantly. But for the fact that Dr. West is here, we could go home, because I always want to hear what he has to say, and I talk to him every day and co-host a radio program with him, and yet I'm moved, and I am empowered, I'm enlightened, I'm encouraged, I'm inspired, I am unsettled every time I hear him bring forth, as you will be today. But there are a few things that I want to raise right quick before I get Dr. West to the podium and give you as much time as we can give him, since he's our guest here in LA today from Princeton, to express himself in his own way. And then, of course, we're going to come to you in the audience to get your questions and your comments about how we get serious in this nation about eradicating poverty before poverty eradicates us. How do we eradicate it before it eradicates us? There are three things I want to wrestle with just right quick here before Dr. West comes. I mentioned that Dr. West has been to 3 different cities now, putting himself out front as being a supporter and being a comrade of those who are raising the kind of hell that we see being raised every day now, that now has the attention of the national media. Imagine just a few days ago, these folk were being written off as a group of crazies. You recall this, right? It was just a few days ago that they would not be given any kind of respect. And now there are thousands of folk in hundreds of cities, not just in this country, but indeed around the world, who are being fueled by the energy, being fueled by the excitement that they see happening in this country around these particular issues. I just read this morning in the New York Times. I don't always agree with everything the New York Times has to say, but that editorial today was brilliant. If you've not read today's New York Times, read their take on these protesters. The Wall Street Journal has been covering this, and every major media outlet in this country, not because they want to, but because they have to, have now been covering these protests. And I just happen to think that the timing of these protests and the timing of our poverty tour and the timing of the poverty week that you're about to see on PBS on my late night show, starting on Monday night, all this week, Monday, October 10th through the 14th, the timing of all of this is, shall we say, quite propitious. I don't want to be sacrilegious and say divine. It might very well be divine. Providential, I'll take that. Thank you, sir. But it certainly is propitious, if not providential, that all this is happening at the same time. So let me just start by sharing with you 3 questions that Dr. West and I heard time and time again over the last few days as we've been doing media interviews, preparing for this town hall here in Los Angeles and for the Poverty Week, again on PBS this week. In no particular order, we've been asked countless times by these interviewers, and I think Dr. West will concur, who are these protesters? Who are they? And some have tried to suggest that these protesters are about 99% white. First of all, that's a lie from hell. They are not 99% white. As I mentioned, we were at Occupy LA over the weekend, and you can see the multiracial, multicultural, multi-ethnic tenor and turnout in this march. You can see it starting to grow. And even if they were 99% white, what's that got to do with anything? What does it matter if they are the ones that have the courage to stand up and to raise these issues? I was saying to Dr. West in the car on the way over here, what's funny about this is they're 99% white, some want to suggest. Some want to suggest that they really aren't representing the 99% that they say they represent, but they're really just an interesting slice of the 1%. The point is there are all kinds of critiques. Anything they can do to demonize and to cast aspersion on these protesters, they are doing as if the protesters were they 99% black. Y'all see where I'm going with this? The attack would be even more vicious, more vitriolic, more vulgar if they were 99% African American. So the race is not the factor. The issue is, what are the grievances? And are these grievances legitimate? Put another way, the question is not, and the media keeps asking this, the question is not why they are out there. The question is why you ain't out there. The question is not what they are saying. The question is why you ain't got nothing to say. The question is not what they're doing, but why you ain't doing nothing. That's what the question is. So we gotta ask the right questions here. But who are these protesters? In a word, they are us. These protesters are us. Certainly representatives of us. So I want to get past that nonsensical question of who are they? They are Americans. And they are concerned about the future of this democracy. They're concerned about the future of this democracy. And the timing of their protest, our being here at Wilshire Boulevard Temple, again, is providential and propitious. The second question is, I keep getting asked, what do they want? What do they want? It kind of reminds me of, I worked on Jesse Jackson's 84 and 88 campaign. And I recall the cover of a major magazine, what does Jesse want? And nobody asked that of white candidates for the White House, what do they want? They want to win, fool, they want to win. They want to know, what does Jesse want? So now we ask these questions, we get these questions being asked, what do they want? They want us to live in a nation where bankers don't always get priority. They want us to live in a nation where bankers are held as accountable and as responsible for their crimes as you and I would be for our crimes. They want to see somebody punished for the raping and the pillaging of the American treasury. And I don't think that's too much to ask. They want an America that is as good as its promise. We live in a great nation, but it's not yet a nation as good as its promise. The older I get, the more I realize, Steve, that whether we're black or white or Jew or Gentile or urban or suburban or educated or illiterate, Republican or Democrat, gay or straight, we all want the same thing. And what is that? To live in a nation that is as good as its promise. The problem with America is this divide, this gap between the have-gots and the have-nots continues to widen. The problem is that there's a gap, a gulf between the promise of America and the possibility in America for all of its citizenry, and we have to do more to shrink that gap. What they want is for our leaders to have done what they should have been doing for years past. These protesters are not responsible. Their job is not to write legislation. Their job is to be, as the Bible might say, Dr. West, that voice in the wilderness. That voice in the wilderness crying aloud. That's what they're doing. So Keith Oldman asked me on his current TV show the other night, do I think they can be, and this is the third question, do you think, Tavis, that these protesters can be successful? And I say very simply, they already are. They already are. The fact that they have all the rest of us now engaged in a dialogue about what kind of a country we are going to be. Somebody said America has grown older, but we've not grown wiser. We've grown older, but we've not grown up. And there's work to be done in this country to make it fair and equitable for every one of us as Americans. So there's questions of who they are and what they want. Can they be successful? Can they make a difference? Are questions that I think are significant enough to address in this town hall. But questions, again, where I think the timing and the intersection between these kinds of questions and these kinds of protests and what Dr. West and I have been trying to do, I think this is a wonderful intersection. Let me say a quick word now about what it is that we have been trying to do for those who have not been following this, but came out today to hear more. This summer, Dr. West and I engaged in what we call the Poverty Tour. We got on a bus, went to 11 states, 18 different cities to talk about poverty in America. Unapologetically to do our part to raise the level of debate about poverty in America, to push this issue higher up on the American agenda. You do realize that in the last presidential debate, the last presidential race for the White House, there were 3 presidential debates between Mr. McCain and Mr. Obama. You'll recall this. 3 debates between McCain and Obama. The word poor, the word poverty did not come up one time. The word poor, as the economy was crashing, the word poor, the word poverty did not come up one time. Obama never uttered it. McCain never uttered it. None of the moderators ever uttered it. Never a question, never an answer about poverty in America. A whole lot of talk about the middle class, but no conversation about the perennially poor. Well, guess what? A few years later, we learned on this tour that the new poor are the former middle class. The new poor are the former middle class. That's what Rabbi Lee was talking about when he read that letter. We saw these folk all across the country who had been solidly a part of the middle class for years. And now they've lost their jobs and they've lost their homes. They've lost their pension. They've lost their savings. They've lost everything. We went to a tent city in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and saw 48 families living outside in tents under freeway overpasses. Now, in just a matter of days, and I know this because I was just there a couple of days ago, it's going to get real cold in Michigan in just a matter of days. And these 48 families, this is just one tent city that we visited. There were many others we could have gone to. Went to one tent city to see these families living outside in tents. I asked one lady, not that it matters, but she happened to be a white woman who'd been gainfully employed for years. And I asked her, how did you get out here to this tent city? And she said that she went to the city's housing agency. And they were the ones who recommended to her the tent city. The city's agency couldn't do anything for her. They recommended to her that she go to this tent city. Something is wrong in America. Something is wrong. When public institutions funded by your money and my money are referring people to tent cities. That's what's happening in America because the new poor are the former middle class. We saw a white brother down in, where were we, Akron, Ohio. Ohio, we all know, bellwether state in every presidential election. There's going to be a lot of campaigning done in Ohio in the next year for the White House. We were in a room, Rabbi Leader, with military veterans. A room full of nothing but, we wanted to talk to military veterans. We on this tour, we talked to everybody. All races, all classes, all colors, all creeds, all religions. We started this tour as we should have, since they always get left out of the conversation. We started this tour on a Native American Indian reservation. That's where we started. And we closed. I should mention right quick, we asked our Native American brothers and sisters, you remember this, Doc? We asked our Native American brothers and sisters about the recession, and they said 2 words. What recession? You get the point, right? Conditions for them are so perennially bad that they didn't know that there was a recession. That's how difficult times are for them all the time. We started on Native American reservation and ended this tour, as we should have, in Memphis, Tennessee, where the greatest American we have ever produced, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., gave his life working with sanitation workers in that poor people's campaign. That's what we ended the tour in Memphis, Tennessee, in honor of the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But along the way, we had various stops over these 11 states and these 18 cities, and we went to Akron, Ohio, in a room full of military veterans. These are folk now, my father, I'm partial to these individuals because my father was in the military. I'm a military kid. My father served this country in the Air Force for 37 years, and my siblings followed him, some of them into the armed forces. It wasn't for me, but it was for them. And I support them and celebrate them and the courage they have, putting their lives on the front line every day as a member of the armed forces. So we were in a room full of military veterans, and no one in that room, they've served their country honorably. Everybody in that room had been out of work for at least 2 years. Some 3, some 4. Military veterans putting their lives on the line for our freedom. Out of work for 2, 3, and 4 years. And there was this one brother. We had to travel with Kleenex because the tears were just flowing all the time, Steve. This brother, in answer to one of my questions, told me about how he had worked for a major retailer who had to close hundreds of stores around the country because of the economic downturn. And he was laid off after many, many years of working for this major retailer. He got laid off. He could no longer take care of his family. They lost their home after he lost his job. They spent all their savings. He lost his pension. Everything he had was gone. And he and his wife of many, many years had to make a decision. They decided that there was no way they were going to make it together. They had to split up. Had to split up and try to make it on their own. This marriage did not dissolve because they didn't love each other. It didn't dissolve because the bond had been broken. It didn't dissolve for any reason other than the fact that they did not see how they were going to make it together with the expenses that they had. So he lost everything. Kind of sounds like Job, doesn't it? Yeah. He lost everything, and then he lost his family. And separately, they're both still trying to make it, hoping that one day they can reunite. He can one day reunite with his bride of many years. These are the kinds of stories. See, these numbers, these stats about poverty in America are damning. Almost 50 million people now living in poverty. The fastest groups of folk joining those ranks, you know, women and children. 50 million Americans in poverty now. Women and children joining those ranks every single day. The worst thing you can do to any human being, I think, is to make them feel invisible. To make them feel that they're disposable, that they're an afterthought, that they're a political calculation. That's the worst thing you can do to an American citizen or any citizen in the world, to make them feel invisible, unimportant, and disposable. And yet that's what's happening in this country. There was a report called the Rasmussen Report that came out a few months ago that found that just about half of Americans think, about half of us now believe, that our best days as a nation are already behind us. Something is wrong when you're trying to advance a country. So all that nonsense about American exceptionalism, we're the greatest country in the world, all of that talk is being called into question when half of your population believes that your best days as a nation are already behind you. The bottom line is this: we cannot sustain this democracy if this gap between the well-to-do, between the elite and the poor, continues to grow. Our democracy is going to get crushed under the weight of its own poverty. That's why I said we have to figure out how we eradicate poverty before it eradicates us. We are getting to a place now where I call it the Popeye principle. As a kid, I loved, I'm an adult and I still love Popeye. But Popeye, as you recall, I know I ain't the only one, don't laugh at me, I ain't the only one in here. Popeye would have it, when Popeye got to a point where he had enough, what would he say? I done stood all I can stand, and I can't stand no more. I ain't the only one. There are a whole lot of Americans who are getting to that Popeye moment, when they stood all they can stand, and they can't stand no more. So this is not just, this is not this nonsensical argument. This is not about class warfare, not about class war. And if it is, it's because war was declared on the poor a long time ago. Our Congress has the right and the power to declare war anytime they choose. And they've done that, quite frankly, too many times. I can think of 2 cases that come to mind right quick, where we've declared war and we had no business being there, and still can't find a way to get out of what we're in right now. The longest running war in this country. Dr. King said this is a war. War is the enemy of the poor. War is the enemy of the poor. War is the enemy of the poor. Resources just being squandered. Think of all that could be done here at home if we could extricate ourselves from these skirmishes abroad. We cannot sustain our democracy. This is not just about it's not about class war. It's not about political posturing. I am suggesting to you that literally the future of this democracy is at stake. We cannot continue to go on and on and on uninterrupted with the imbalance in our economic system. So that if you love America, if you are an American patriot, if you really do think we're the greatest nation in the world, if you believe in American exceptionalism, that cannot be sustained if we do not get serious about eradicating poverty in this country. So Dr. West and I went on this tour this summer, not knowing these census numbers were going to come out later, not knowing that the Pew numbers were coming out later, not knowing that the Mary Wright Edelman and the Children's Defense Fund were putting out numbers about children in poverty. We didn't know all these numbers were coming around the time of this tour. But we got out front first, circling back to the beginning of my talk now, because we want to ensure with the little public radio program that we have, that little public television show I do every night, I want to make sure that with these public platforms, unapologetically, that we do everything we can to force onto the political agenda a conversation about poverty this time around. They are going to say the word poor this time. They must talk about poverty this time. There must be a legitimacy to eradicate poverty this time. There's no way in the world we can go through another presidential race with all this happening right now and somehow ignore the elephant in the room, which is poverty. To the president, I simply say this: your jobs bill is a beautiful thing. A little late, but I'm glad you're finally here. Now, I don't believe that the jobs bill is up to the sky, up to the size and the scale of the problem. I don't believe that the jobs bill is up to the skies and the scale of what the problem really is. But I'm glad the president is now behind the jobs bill, and I'm glad he's pushing it, and I'm glad he's out selling it to the American people. But the real question is, when the debate starts on the bill, when the debate starts, are you going to compromise? Are you going to capitulate? Are you going to cave? Or will you stand with courage and conviction and commitment and draw a line in the sand and fight? All the time to me, Tavis, there are some fights that ain't worth fighting even if you win. But there are other fights that you have to fight even if you lose. This fight must be fought, and it must be fought right now. Please welcome America's leading public intellectual with a heart full of grace and a soul tribulated by love, from Princeton, Dr. Cornel West.
Tavis Smiley, telling the truth. Telling the truth. I want to begin by first acknowledging my deep, deep love for Tavis Smiley. It was 26 years ago in this city when I first met him in the office of Mark Blvd Thomas, who I also love so dearly. Give Brother Mark Blvd Thomas a hand. Tavis was at work together as an intern. He Get to be as old as I am, and you see the young brothers and sisters of all colors soaring like an eagle, but never forgetting from whence they come, still on fire for justice. 26 years later, Tavis Smiley, public television, public radio, head of the Tavis Smiley Foundation for Young People, head of the exhibition in America, traveling city to city. Still on fire. That for me is the highest tribute. Don't tell me how many degrees you got. Don't tell me about your education. I want to know what quality of service are you rendering. What's the quality of your love, especially to the least of these. That's the measure. That's the measure. And I say that especially in Los Angeles because I grew up in California, but I know LA has been associated with the culture of superficial spectacle. Oh, yes. I know about the cheap gimmicks and weapons of mass distraction that cultivate addiction, cultivate self-medication for narcissists and hedonists. Oh yes, not just in LA, we're talking about America across the board, but we have a group here today that's cutting against that grain. Is that right? Is that right? This is America too. This is Los Angeles too. This is New York, Chicago too. We want to pay tribute to the captain of the ship here, the shepherd of this grand congregation since 1862. Our precious Jewish brothers and sisters have been enacting a practice echoing the 5th chapter of Amos at their best. Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like a mighty stream. Micah 6:8, do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with thy God. Or Leviticus 19:18, love thy neighbor as thyself. That's the standard. None of us fully approximate it, but we try to do the best that we can. Let's give it up again for our dear brother, Senior Rabbi Steve Leder. Love you, brother. Still going at it. Cutting against the grain. We know how difficult it is for all of us. There's so many in the audience who mean so much to me. I've got my blood brother here, Cliff West. Everybody's my brother, no matter what color you are. My sister, no matter what color you are. But this brother and I came out of the same room. You know what I mean? We emerged in all of that love and funk and stank and stench. Our beloved Irene B. West. Give it up for Cliff West, Cliff West, Cliff West, my brother. Cliff West, my brother. Oh, yeah. Sit next to my very, very dear brother, Scott Carter, who is the executive producer of one of the great cultural institutions, namely the Bill Maher Show. Give it up for Scott Carter. Brother Scott, tell Brother Bill Maher we love him. We do love Brother Bill Maher. He's my progressive agnostic. Oh, we might differ on the God question, but we in the same foxhole. Brother Willis, legendary leader, NAACP, what can we say? Stand up, Brother Willis. Stand up, Brother Willis. One of the great Christian preachers of our time, focus on poverty, Reverend Dr. Manuel Scott there, Salt and oh, Gregory Scott, that's my James Scott, your father. Oh, your father's one of the greatest ever. One of the greatest ever. I go on and on, but I want to dedicate my remarks to 3 towering figures. First is Fred Shuttleworth. Amen. The great Fred Shuttleworth, freedom fighter in Jim Crow, gut bucket, apartheid, American South, Alabama, just passed this week. And then Professor Derek Bell, another freedom fighter. My dear brother, first black professor at Harvard Law School, left Harvard Law School because they refused to hire a black woman. He said, all these brilliant black women lawyers, every nook and cranny and corner of the country, and the Harvard Law faculty still looking like the National Hockey League. Still looking like the audience of our dear Brother Lawrence Webb, bubbles and all. Brother Derek said, I got to go. Oh, what a great figure he was, and last but not least, is our dear brother, Troy Brown, who was the father of our beloved Ren Brown. Stand, Brother Ren. Ren Brown is the national treasure. He's head of the Ebony Repertory Theater here. One of the great artists as well as one of the great figures. Just lost his father. You all know how difficult that can be. And you can't talk about poverty in America unless you begin to make the connection between material poverty, spiritual poverty, psychic poverty, and what kind of armor are you going to have in place to come to terms with it? And that's why we embrace Brother Ren at this moment. I lost my father too, 17 years ago. I didn't have my faith in my friends. I didn't have my partners. I didn't have a little Curtis Mayfield and Aretha. James Cleveland. I would have snapped. And I can still snap at any moment. You just don't know. You just don't know. But let us be very clear. We are living in one of the most critical moments in the history of the country. The pivotal moment, propitious moment. Why? Because echoing the first line of Henry David Thoreau's great classic Walden, finally our fellow citizens are beginning to wake up. They've been sleepwalking for so long. They've been living in a state of denial for so long. They've been indifferent to the most fundamental issues facing America for so long. But now we see an awakening. Yes, an awakening of those Sly Stone call everyday people. Oh yes, every day people come to an awakening and begin to recognize, lo and behold, we can straighten our backs up at any time. Every day people straighten their backs up. They're going somewhere because folk can't ride your back unless it's bent. We got so many poor people, working people, red brothers and sisters, brown brothers and sisters, white brothers and sisters, black brothers and sisters walking around with their backs bent, feeling sorry for themselves, acting as if they're not agents in history, acting as if they don't come together and organize and mobilize, they can't reshape their destiny. Yes, this is Yom Kippur season, echoing yesterday about what? Re-examination, echoing what? Rebirth, echoing what? Words of Isaiah, book of Jonah. Are we going to remain awake enough such that justice becomes part and parcel of who we are, how we think, how we go about our lives? And if we don't do it now, we can lose this American experiment in democracy. Brother Tavis Smiley came up with the idea and said, Brother West, would you like to go on a poverty tour? I told him, I said, brother, you and I have been fighting poverty 30 years now. Me much longer, I'm much older than my brother. He said, but I'm ready. We met in Mom's family room. We started with prayer. We love our secular brothers and sisters, but we happen to be a praying folk. Get our spirits right. And to then connect to those who came before, like the Sankofa bird. You turn back first in order to move forward so you have a sense of what your tradition is, what stories you have in place, what narratives you're going to deploy. Why? Because those who are already dead have already set the highest standards. You're not going to get deeper than Amos. You're not going to get deeper than Hillel. You're not going to get deeper than Jesus. I'll say that as a Christian, but you're not going to get deeper than a Malcolm or a Fannie Lou Hamer or a Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel or a Dorsey Day or a Fear Paragon. No, they set the standard. And you know in your own life, some of your grandmothers and grandfathers and aunts and uncles and friends who set standards you will never be able to achieve. You got to bring them with you in talking about poverty in America, because anybody in America, let alone anybody in the world who really has a genuine love for poor people, you better put your cemetery clothes on. You better get coffin ready. Because when you actually begin to speak in such a way that the powers that be want to keep track of you because they have interest and they've been criminalizing poverty, they've been demonizing poor people for so long, what do you think the prison industrial complex is all about? Why do you think they had 800,000 people in 1975 and 2.6 million today? Nobody wants to say a mumbling word. Don't get me wrong, I know there's many of you all in the audience who've been doing magnificent work, but I'm talking about in the high places that have visibility. We so obsessed with celebrity. Nothing but a form of spiritual malnutrition, spiritual emptiness. Nothing but a form of moral constipation. Even if you know what's right, you're still stuck and it won't come out. You say, well, what's the problem, Brother Webb? Turn to the Wall Street activists, our brothers and sisters of all colors, who said we're going to straighten our backs up and we're going to tell America the truth, and the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. That's in Hebrew scripture too. That's on page 18 to adorn those negative dialectics too. The condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. Occupy Boston, occupy Los Angeles. Tell the truth to the people. What is the truth? The truth is that there has been corporate greed running amok that is squeezing the juices out of the precious democratic experiment, with the top 10% gaining 100% of the income growth in 2 years, the top 1% gaining 81% of the income growth over 25 years, and it's not because the well-to-do are so smart and clever. It's because the system is designed in such a way that the benefits flow to the top. We got 42% of our children of all colors living in or near poverty. That's a national disgrace. It's a moral obscenity. It's an ethical abomination. They are 100% of the future. We are concerned about them. We are fundamentally concerned about focusing on them. I say, brother, how come? How come? Because we love them. That's why. Because they have the same value and the same status and the same stature as the well-to-do, the middle classes, the underclasses, the working classes. Every human being is made in the image and the likeness of the Christians and Jews and Muslims, God. And if you're a secular brother and sister, you still have a commitment to equality, fundamental equality. That's true for our prophetic Mormon brothers and sisters. We got that little truncated debate about whether Mormons are Christian or not. No, we concerned about what kind of love do you have? What kind of courage do you have? What kind of compassion do you have? Are you willing to come together with others and work together? So let's tell that story. 30 years, there has been, as Brother Tavis said, top-down, one-sided war against working people and poor people. Working people's wages stagnated. Corporate profits breaking records. 30 years ago, $24 for every $1 for CEO worker. Today, $343 for every $1 for workers. What is going on? Working people's power has been pushed against the wall. It's not just the attacks on unions, private or public unions, but workers in general are viewed as just manipulable and disposable utilities. Outsourcing, cheap labor, race to the bottom, crossing national boundaries. This is no accident. In the 1950s, corporations paid 35% of the income taxes. Today they spend 9% of the income taxes. Why? Because there's tax havens outside of the country. 1 out of 4 corporations didn't pay a penny. Not 1 penny. Including the corporation that our dear brother Barack Obama chose the CEO to head the Jobs Commission. GE, Brother Jeff Emmett, not a penny in taxes. It's warped. We got warped priorities. Our bridges, our sewage system, our schools for our children. Not enough jobs with a living wage. And what happened? We about to go off the cliff in 2008 because the corporate greed was so intensified. The indifference to poor people. Remember, Rabbi Joshua Heschel was so right. He said indifference to evil is more evil than evil itself. Oh, yeah. And what were we doing during that period? Oh, we're so obsessed with the lives of the rich and famous. Oh, we're so into reality television. We're so into American Idol. Nothing but weapons of mass distraction. And what were our politicians doing? They were disproportionately shaped by the Wall Street oligarchs and corporate plutocrats in the form of lobbyists, 26 lobbyists for every congressman or woman. They need big money in order to run for re-election. So we end up with a Republican Party that is often mean-spirited and cold-hearted. I heard Brother Herbert Kane say the other day, the reason why poor folk are poor is because it's their fault. They ought to get up and get a job. Have you noticed the long lines when they actually put forward possibilities for jobs, Brother Kane? And I zero in on Brother Herbert Kane because you can see it's not a color affair. Black folk, red folk, yellow folk can be just as cold and callous to poor people as anybody else. I don't care what color you are. I don't care what religion is. I want to know what the quality of your service and the depth of your love. That's the question. That's the question. That's the legacy of Martin King. Martin King was shot down like a dog. 72% of Americans disapproved of him. 55% of black people disapproved of him. He said, that's all right with me. I'm trying to bear witness. I'm trying to zero in on poor folk. And I know that organizing poor people always scares people. Always scares people. Call them a mob. Call them thugs. Call them gangsters. Wait a minute. What do you call insider trading on Wall Street? What do you call predatory lending? What do you call insider trading? What do you call something wrong? Something wrong. And don't tell me that within 7 days you can arrest 100 folk protesting corporate greed at Wall Street, but you can't investigate or prosecute not one on Wall Street. Same status as anybody else's babies. Look at our educational system. Finland's #1 in the world in science and math. 95% of their teachers are unionized, so it couldn't be the teachers' union. They got classes of 14. They got a teacher and a teacher's aide. The salaries of the teachers are high, so when a teacher walks in the room, they say, oh my God, there's somebody who's precious, who's concerned about the future of our country. They're the caretaker of the precious children. Very different stature. America, educational system for the well-to-do is #1. If you're whole for poverty, American education is roughly the same as Finland. How come? Because if you're well-to-do, you do send your precious children to schools in a small class, where the teachers are high quality and tremendously affirmed. Parents are involved. Administrators have a vision And the students are told nearly every day, you're smart, whether it's true or not, you're smart, you're smart, you're smart. Self-confidence, self-respect, self-regard makes all the difference in the world. But when you bring poverty in, America drops far down the list. The issue of poverty is always the way into any serious talk about any society. I don't care where it is. It's true in Greece this very moment. True in Spain. Our brothers and sisters in Israel on the housing issue. Massive demonstrations. And they haven't even moved toward the Israeli-Palestinian issue inside of Israel with the precious Israelis dealing with their own class struggles and tensions. Looking at the world from the vantage point of those below is the very legacy of what this institution is all about. To be human at its highest level is to exercise hesed, loving kindness to the orphan and the widow and the stranger and the fatherless and the motherless. Oh yes, you don't have to be religious to understand the spiritual richness and the moral depth of that conception of what it means to be human. But in our market-driven society, we're losing that. It's especially true among our young people. That's what's so magnificent about the Occupy Wall Street movement, because it's disproportionately young people. They are fed up, they're tired, they're hungry for justice, and the first question corporate media raises is what? We want to know what your demand is. We're trying to wake the country up.
There is a microphone to my right in this aisle. There's a microphone to my left in this aisle. As you line up with your quick questions and comments, let me remind those who may have just tuned in that the voice you just heard was that of America's leading public intellectual. Please show your love one more time to Dr. Cornel West. If you are listening to us right now on KPFK in the greater Los Angeles area or on WBAI in the great city of New York, you're listening to a live town hall meeting in the sanctuary of the Wilshire Boulevard Temple, grand, iconic, historic site in Los Angeles. As Dr. Cornel West and yours truly, Tavis Smiley, wrap up what is the last stop in an 18-city, now 19 cities, including LA, so 19-city, 11-state trip around the country to talk about poverty. We call this trip the Poverty Tour, and this week on my late night show on PBS, Tavis Smiley on PBS, starting Monday, October the 10th through Friday, October the 14th, every night this week. I think unprecedented on public television. Certainly on television, period, maybe. But 5 nights of a sustained conversation about the poor in this country. Every night we start the show with highlights of the trip that we took around the country, and those highlights will be followed every night by a conversation with a poverty policy expert. Every night this week, our guest next week, starting Monday, will include people like, we're going to kick it off the way we should, Dr. West on Monday night. Dr. West on Monday night on our PBS show. And then later in the week, Jim Wallace, working on poverty with sojourners. And the Obama administration has sent us Kathleen Sebelius to give us their point of view. The Secretary of the HHS Department, and who else do we have? Vicky Escara from Feeding America will join us next week. And who am I missing? Jeffrey Sachs, a wonderful new text, Columbia professor, working on poverty for many, many years. So wonderful conversation all this week, starting Monday night on our PBS show. But again, now you're listening to a live town hall meeting at the Wilshire Boulevard Temple in LA. I've had my say. My dear friend Rabbi Steve Leder has had his wonderful say. Dr. West has had his say. And unlike some town halls of certain politicians, we have not scripted the questions. We have not pre-selected the questioners. We have not told them what to say, what to ask. We have told them to be brief. And if they are not, I will use moderator's prerogative and make your presentation brief. So it matters not to Dr. Wester whether it's a question or a comment. This is your town hall for the next 45 minutes until we wrap up this conversation on national radio. So I'll start here and go back and forth to either side. On this side, give me your question or your comment, please.
Good evening. Thank you, Tavis and Dr. West. I'm one of your students. You don't remember me, but I am. And I want to tell you that you're a brilliant, brilliant man. And I believe in my heart that what you do for the least of these brothers and sisters, you do unto me. I'm a pastor as well here in Los Angeles. And I just want to tell you, I'm thankful to God for people who will stand up and say, you know what, I don't care what anybody else thinks. I'm going to stand up for the least of these, my brothers and sisters. So,
I thank you. Let me just say two things. The Bible that I read says that a child shall lead them. He is no child. He showed y'all how to do it. Everybody got this? Amen? Say amen again. I'm sorry, Steve. I know you said amen in the temple, but that's okay. So the good reverend, thank you. It's Hebrew, exactly. So the good reverend showed you how to do it. And before I go to our next question or comment, let me remind those listening on KPFK, WBAI, that we can take your questions if you go to Town Hall at Tavis Smiley or Town Hall at Cornel West. Either way, Town Hall at Tavis Smiley or Town Hall at Cornel West. We don't want to leave the listening audience out. This is an interactive conversation. I got a few questions in my hand already that we will get to, along with the questions in this auditorium. That said, to my left.
I want to thank you for having this conversation, allowing us to participate in it, and I agree with the thrust of this conversation. And I will add that it does seem as if this president, for political expediency, does act as if black concerns in black life even is both ignorable and expendable. And Dr. West, I did attend your conversation with Carl Dix at UCLA, and I just want to express appreciation for you appealing to us to continue to fight against the military-industrial complex as well as the system of global white supremacy. And I know this conversation has had a domestic focus, but the problem of black poverty is a global phenomenon, particularly on the continent of Africa as it were.
Let me get Dr. West to say a quick word about the last comment about the global nature of poverty, because he's right about that. We'll move on. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Well, you're absolutely right. And that's in part what I had in mind when I talked about the various kinds of forms of protest escalating, mobilizing citizens, Greece, Spain, all around the world. We're talking about a global capitalist economy that has been so obsessed with profits that the needs of people, especially everyday people or poor people, is secondary or tertiary. And even if one, for example, wants to argue that capitalism is still the most desirable way of designing society, we know there's a difference between unfettered, unregulated, cronyistic capitalism as opposed to a capitalism that has various regulations, just regulations, to ensure that the power of corporate elites is attenuated when it comes to taking advantage of the weak and the vulnerable. And that's a larger discussion.
Yeah.
That's a larger discussion. But your point about the international character is very important. That's what's so important about the Occupy movement. You have to make connections around the world, in part because oligarchs and plutocrats are organized around the world.
All right. Thank you, sir. We appreciate it. Thank you. To my right. To my right.
Yes,
sir.
That's true. That's
all right.
True.
Yes, sir.
Hey, how you doing? I'm gonna make it brief. The question I have, the comment I have first is, it seems ironic that it had to get to this point where middle class began to understand what poor people were to go out downtown. Now, when they were middle class, they weren't thinking about us. They were thinking about keeping that life the way it was. So in reality, I understand that, and it's ironic. And I'm sorry they have to experience that, but they need to experience that because we've been experiencing all our life.
We'll take that. I thank you for your comment. Thank you, sir. Yes.
My main concern with poverty is the prison industrial complex and education. And I really believe in order to approach something, we have to have a holistic approach, and I'm asking anybody for advice and ideas, because without good education, there will be more and more prisons. And I see the education in this city, good spots, bad spots, to me, that, well, I think Ronald Reagan started dismantling education across the country.
Let me say a quick word. First of all, in the tradition of the Black church, we'd say amen to that again. Dr. West spoke about education earlier. I spoke about it. You're right. There's a direct link between poverty and education, and the numbers are so clear. When you do not get access to a high-quality education, your chances of being amongst the poor goes up exponentially. Just a few weeks ago, for those who watch our PBS work, we had a primetime special on PBS called Too Important to Fail. We know the banks were too big to fail. We had a special in primetime called Too Important to Fail. It was a special specifically about our education system. And we're doing a number of these primetime specials over the next couple of years on PBS. But this first one focused specifically on black boys. And we tried to make the case that the crisis that black boys are enduring right now in education, where a crisis that white boys were enduring, it would not just be a national disgrace, it would be a state of emergency in this country about the crisis in education. So the piece on black boys was just the first of a number of primetime specials we're going to be doing. I might add right quick that for those in the LA area, we have now partnered with some foundations to do some real work, free to the public, with parents. These parent summits that we're going to be doing to help parents understand the tools they have available to them to increase the performance of their students in the classroom. What are the tools? What can we do as a parent to aid and abet your child getting a high-quality education? This is not just about black boys. It's for students across the board. If you go to our website, Tavis Smiley Foundation, you can learn more about these parent summits that are free. We're traveling the country with these free seminars. The first one will be here in LA on October the 29th. More about that at our website. But education and poverty absolutely and inextricably linked together.
Can I just have a quick word about that? That is that there's increasing unemployment, chronic unemployment among the highly educated. Which means that as important as education is, and it is very important, and I'd rather stay for education in schooling. A lot of people go to school don't really get educated. You know what I mean? They get their brains titillated and cultivated, but where's their hearts? Where's their souls? What is their relation to the tradition? That's something else. That's paideia, that's deeper. But it means the structure of the labor market needs to be examined. Because we've got MAs, we've got a number of MAs and MBAs.
Oh, yeah. Unemployed now.
Who couldn't get a job in here. You see what I mean? So you can see how complicated this thing is.
Thank you, though. Yes, to my right.
Thank you so much, you guys, for being here, and Dr. West. This is like one of the greatest days of my life, getting to just ask you a question.
Oh, my dear
Thank you, Mr. Smiley. And I just need to say one thing: boycotting and following the money. You know, Target, Walmart, the Lakers. You know, you follow the money of the Lakers. You know, it goes into conservative pockets. We need to wake up. And the poor have power, because we still buy things. You know, and no one's talking about that, about what Martin Luther King taught us, what Cesar Chavez taught us. Boycotting. And I had a cousin of mine that passed away at an age, short age, 54 years old. He was mayor of Athens, and he fought for the poor in Greece. And I'm so glad you mentioned my Greek brothers and sisters, our brothers and sisters, because they're going through it right now with the privatization that we went through, that my family went through. We lost our home in the late 80s, and I'm lucky to be here right now.
Let me first of all, thank you for your comment. Let me take part of what you said and ask Dr. West a quick question. We got as many folk we're trying to get to in the time that we have left here. He has a powerful phrase, and I'm not sure we all believe that. I wonder if you believe in what you might say to this notion that the poor do have power. We say all the time, we say all the time that wonderful phrase, Steve, that we are called to speak truth to power. But what about truth to the powerless? Do the poor, Dr. West, in this economy, do the poor have power?
Oh, the poor have tremendous power. One, I just want to say thank you, and I love coming right back at you, though, brother. But the poor have tremendous power. One is that we wouldn't even have a dynamic culture without poor people. Hip-hop is a major cultural breakthrough in the last 40 years. Who created hip-hop? It was poor brothers and sisters who were pushed to the margins, no art programs in the schools, therefore they didn't play the instruments, therefore they just sampled on the technology. People thought it was just going to be a joke. Now it's a multi-billion dollar industry. The poor have always had tremendous power, but it takes the form of voice, it takes the form of culture, it takes the form of song. But the question is, do we have political power? And the challenge always is, and this is what's so very important, my brother, is in these kinds of moments, because these are revolutionary times and the counter-revolution at the moment is winning. But in revolutionary times, we just have to make sure that when the awakening takes place, especially among poor brothers and sisters, that it's channeled through love and justice and not hatred and revenge. Because the poor folks have been there for a long time. They've been terrorized, they've been traumatized, they've been stigmatized. It takes spiritual strength to talk about love and justice as opposed to just revenge and hatred. And that's going to be the real challenge. And if it's channeled through the hatred and the revenge, we all going down. And the big difference, for example, between big money is when the Tea Party movement took off, they had one or two incidents projected in the media like it was a major movement, and then the oligarchs and plutocrats began to pay big cash to support people. Wall Street protesters, they were out there 3 weeks before the mainstream media even took notice of them. And they don't have big money behind them. They've got their bodies, they got their convictions, and they have more and more people joining them. And so the issue of poor people having power is a very important one. Poor people have tremendous power, but poor people don't have enough political power.
Listen, do your own math and learn from the stuff that you are missing. Create your own path with your own vision.